Jessica has always been the perfect wife, the perfect professor, the perfect everything. But today, something didn't feel right. As I walked past her lecture hall, I noticed the door slightly ajar. Curious, I peeked inside, and that's when I froze. She was there, on her knees. Her back was to me, but the sound, it was unmistakable. A wet, choked sound that made my stomach drop. I stumbled back, my mind racing. What the hell is going on? If you ever meet my wife, Jessica, you'd understand why people can't stop talking about her. She's the kind of woman who just stands out. Tall, poised, with long dark hair and a voice that demands attention. She's been teaching political science at Stanford for over a decade, and if you ask me, she's brilliant at it. Her lectures are always packed. Her students hang on her every word, and I've lost count of how many times I've heard her name mentioned in conversations around campus. We've been married for 15 years now, and every day I still feel lucky to call her my wife. She's confident, driven, and so full of energy that sometimes it's hard to keep up. But that's just who she is, and I've always admired her for it. We met when I was still figuring out my life. I'd just started working in Stanford's administration, handling financial reports and budgeting for the university. Jessica was already teaching her first year, and from the moment I saw her, I was hooked. She walked into a faculty mixer like she owned the place, effortlessly charming everyone in the room. I spent the whole night trying to work up the nerve to talk to her. When I finally did, she smiled, tilted her head, and said, "What took you so long?" That was Jessica, always one step ahead. These days, our life feels stable and full. We don't have kids, but it's never been a priority for either of us. Jessica has her career, I have mine, and we've built a rhythm that works for us. Our weekends are usually spent hiking in the hills or visiting wineries in Napa. Jessica has a taste for the finer things: boutique hotels, Michelin-star restaurants, curated art galleries. I don't mind tagging along, even if I'm more of a burgers and beer kind of guy. This morning was just like any other. Jessica was already up when I walked into the kitchen, her phone in one hand and a cup of coffee in the other. She was dressed in a sleek navy blazer and a pencil skirt, her dark hair tied back in a bun. She looked every bit the part of a professor who could walk into a UN meeting and hold her own. "You got a big day ahead?" I asked, grabbing my own cup of coffee. She smiled, setting her phone down. "Just the usual. Lecture at 9, then a couple of meetings. What about you?" "Numbers, numbers, and more numbers," I said with a shrug. She laughed softly, walked over, and kissed me on the cheek. "Don't let them drown you." I watched her grab her bag and head for the door, heels clicking against the tile floor. Before leaving, she glanced back and said, "We've got dinner with the Thompsons this Friday. Don't forget." I nodded. Wouldn't miss it. After she left, I stood there for a moment, sipping my coffee and thinking about how lucky I was. Jessica had a way of making everything seem effortless, from her career to our marriage. And though I sometimes wondered if I could ever match her drive or ambition, it didn't matter. We were a team, and I like to think I played my part well. Jessica has always been an extraordinary woman, but over the past few months, it's like she's reached a whole new level. Her lectures are packed, sometimes with students standing in the back because there aren't enough seats. She's been asked to chair panels, lead discussions, and even give a guest lecture at Princeton next semester. I overheard one of her students talking about her last week in the quad. "Professor Miller is just amazing," he said to his friend. "She's so smart. And have you seen the way she carries herself? She's like iconic." I smiled to myself. That's my wife. Jessica has always had a presence about her. She's the kind of person people gravitate toward, whether it's in a lecture hall, at a conference, or even in line at the coffee shop. It's one of the things I love most about her, how effortless she makes everything look. At home, I've noticed she's been spending more time getting ready in the mornings. Her wardrobe is more polished than ever, and she started experimenting with new hairstyles and makeup. She's even bought a few new pairs of heels. When I teased her about it, she laughed and said, "If I'm going to stand in front of a room full of 20-year-olds, I might as well look the part." Tuesday has always been our day. Jessica has a long lecture in the morning, and it's become our little tradition for me to swing by her office afterward. Her office is in a quieter corner of the campus, away from the busy lecture halls and student comments. It's cozy, with bookshelves that line the walls and a window that lets in the late morning sunlight. For the past year, We've used that time to reconnect in a way that feels special. Just the two of us, away from the busyness of work and life. It's a tradition that keeps our relationship exciting, even after 15 years of marriage. This Tuesday, though, things felt a little different. I knocked on her door and peeked in. Jessica was sitting at her desk, her blazer draped over the back of her chair, and her hair tied up in a bun. She looked up when she saw me and smiled, but it was a little off. Not cold, exactly, but not her usual warm smile either. "Hey," I said, stepping inside and closing the door behind me. "How was your lecture?" "Good," she said, her fingers still typing away at her laptop. "I think it went well. The students asked a lot of great questions." I leaned against the edge of her desk. "You know, it's Tuesday." She looked up at me, her expression softening for a moment before she glanced back at her screen. "I know, but not today, okay? I've got so much to do, and I really need to finish this." Her words caught me off guard. She'd never said no before. "Are you sure? We've always made time, even on busy days." She sighed, closing her laptop halfway. "I know, and I'm sorry. I just have a ton of deadlines right now. Maybe later tonight?" I nodded, trying to hide my disappointment. "Of course. I get it. I'll let you get back to it." She reached for my hand and gave it a quick squeeze. "Thanks for understanding." I smiled and stepped out of her office, closing the door behind me. As I walked back to my own office, I couldn't help but feel a little let down. It wasn't a big deal. Jessica was busy, and she always took her work seriously. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something about today was off. For the past 15 years, Jessica has always been a woman in control. Everything about her, her career, her presence, even the way she walks into a room, commands attention. And over the last few months, it's like she's reached a new peak. Her lectures are more popular than ever. Students rave about her energy and insight, and even her colleagues seem to hang on to her every word. Last week, I overheard a group of younger professors discussing her in the faculty lounge. "She's just brilliant," one of them said. "Honestly, I don't know how she manages to look so put together all the time." And her lectures? Packed every single session. Hearing things like that always makes me smile. Jessica has worked hard to get to where she is, and she deserves the recognition. At home, though, things have felt a little different lately. Jessica has been more reserved, less likely to share the details of her day. Her phone has become a near-constant companion, always in her hand or within reach. When I ask how her day was, her answers are short and vague, as though she's too distracted to talk. But I chalk it up to her workload. With all the new projects she's taken on, it's no wonder she's been more stressed. This Tuesday started like any other. Jessica left early for her lecture, and I busied myself with some paperwork in the finance office. Around midday, I decided to stop by her office, hoping to pick up where we'd left off the week before. When I got there, her office was empty. I called her, but the call went straight to voicemail. A little unusual, but not entirely unheard of. I sent her a quick text. "Hey, are you free? Thought I'd stop by." No response. I waited for a few minutes, then decided to check with one of her colleagues. Maybe she was caught up in a meeting, but no one seemed to know where she was. I wandered the halls, trying to think of where she might be. That's when it hit me. Her lecture hall. Maybe she'd stayed behind after her class to prep for her next session. As I approached the door to the hall, I noticed it wasn't fully closed. A sliver of light spilled out into the corridor. Something about the scene felt off. I slowed my pace, my hand hovering near the edge of the door as I leaned in to look through the gap. The room was mostly dark, save for the faint glow of daylight filtering through the windows. At first, I didn't see anyone. Then my eyes adjusted to the dim light, and I spotted her. Jessica was in the far corner of the room, on her knees. Her back was to me, her dark hair tied in a loose bun that swayed slightly as she moved. I blinked, trying to process what I was seeing, and then I heard it, a wet, rhythmic sound that echoed faintly in the silence of the hall. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. My mind raced with questions, each one more horrifying than the last. What was she doing? Who was she with? I wanted to burst through the door, to demand an explanation, but my legs wouldn't move. I just stood there, staring through the narrow gap, unable to breathe. For what felt like an eternity, I couldn't look away. Then, as quietly as I could, I took a step back and turned away from the door. My thoughts were a blur as I walked down the hall. I told myself there had to be a reasonable explanation for what I'd seen, something that didn't mean what I thought it did. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just glimpsed something that would change everything. The car ride home was unbearable. Jessica sat beside me, scrolling through her phone, humming softly to herself. She seemed so calm, so normal. Meanwhile, my mind was spinning. The image of her on her knees in the lecture hall, the sounds I'd heard, it all played on a loop in my head. "You're quiet tonight," she said, glancing at me. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. "Just tired," I muttered. She didn't push further, but the silence between us felt heavier than ever. Normally, she'd tell me about her day or ask me about mine. Tonight, the only sound was the hum of the engine. When we got home, Jessica slipped off her shoes and grabbed her bag. "I'm going to take a quick shower," she said casually, heading upstairs. I stayed in the kitchen, leaning against the counter, staring blankly at the fridge. The sound of running water filled the house, but I couldn't focus on anything. My thoughts were a storm. Should I confront her? Did I even want to know the truth? She came back downstairs a few minutes later, her hair damp, wearing her favorite oversized t-shirt and leggings. "I'm wiped out," she said with a small laugh. "You should come to bed soon." I nodded, but I didn't move. I spent the night on the couch, my mind racing. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her in that dark room, heard that sound. My chest felt tight, and I couldn't breathe deeply. By morning, I was still awake. Jessica found me in the kitchen, leaning against the counter with a half-empty mug of coffee. "You look terrible," she said, frowning. "Did you sleep at all?" "Not much," I admitted. "I'm not feeling great. I think I'll take the day off." Concern flickered across her face. "Are you okay? You don't look well." "I'll be fine," I said quickly, forcing a smile. "Just need to rest." She hesitated, then kissed my forehead. "Okay. Call me if you need anything, okay? I'll check on you later." With that, she grabbed her bag and left for work. The silence in the house was oppressive. I tried to distract myself. TV, my phone, anything, but my chest felt heavier with each passing hour. By noon, I was struggling to catch my breath. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. Jessica was calling, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. A few minutes later, I heard her car pull into the driveway. I stood up, but a sharp pain shot through my chest, and the room began to spin. My knees buckled, and I collapsed onto the floor, clutching at my chest. "Daniel." Jessica's voice was frantic as she ran inside. "Daniel, where are you?" I tried to call out, but no sound came. The pain was unbearable, and my vision was fading. When she found me, her face went pale. "Oh my God," she whispered, dropping to her knees. "Stay with me, please." Her hands trembled as she dialed for an ambulance. The last thing I heard was her shouting into the phone, "He's having a heart attack. Hurry." The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor brought me back to consciousness. The lights above me were harsh, and my chest ached as though something heavy was pressing down on it. It took me a moment to realize I was in a hospital bed. A nurse appeared by my side, adjusting the four. "You're awake," she said with a smile. "You gave everyone quite a scare." I tried to speak, but my throat was dry. She handed me a small cup of water, and as I drank, the memories came flooding back. The pain in my chest, collapsing on the floor, Jessica's panicked voice calling for help. Jessica was the first to visit. She came into the room with her usual confidence, but her eyes were red, and her face looked pale. "When I found you," she began, her voice trembling, "I thought I'd lost you. You scared me so much." Her words should have reassured me, but instead, they unsettled me. I couldn't forget what I'd seen in the lecture hall. "Are you okay?" she asked gently. "I'm fine," I muttered, avoiding her gaze. She stayed for a while, talking softly, but I barely responded. Finally, a nurse came in, and Jessica took that as her cue to leave. "I'll come back later," she said, lingering by the door before walking out. Over the next 2 days, I had more visitors. My sister stopped by with flowers, a few colleagues sent their regards, and even some students came to see me. "You're such an inspiration, Professor Miller," one of them said. "We all look up to you." Their words were kind, but I felt detached, like none of it really mattered anymore. What consumed me was the growing tension whenever Jessica entered the room. My heart rate would spike whenever she was near, something the nurses started noticing. "You need to stay calm," one of them said. "Too much stress could make things worse." Calm. The irony wasn't lost on me. On the third evening, there was a knock on the door. A young man stepped in, someone I didn't immediately recognize. He had dark hair and a friendly demeanor, but something about him felt familiar. "Professor Miller," he said warmly. "I just wanted to check on you. I've attended a few of your talks, and I really admire your work." "Thanks," I said, still trying to place him. "I won't stay long," he added. "Just wanted to say I hope you recover soon. Campus isn't the same without you." He left as quickly as he arrived, but his visit stayed with me. I stared at the door, racking my brain to figure out where I'd seen him before. Then it hit me. I remembered walking through campus weeks ago, passing a group of students. One of them, this young man, was laughing and talking loudly about Jessica. "She's incredible," he'd said. "So smart, so classy. And have you seen her figure? Her chest? Absolute perfection." At the time, I dismissed it as harmless admiration. But now, with everything I'd seen and heard, a horrible realization dawned on me. My chest tightened, and I struggled to breathe. The heart monitor began to beep frantically as pain shot through my body. My vision blurred, and the edges of the room started to fade. The last thing I heard was the nurses shouting as they rushed in. Waking up after the second heart attack felt like surfacing from the depths of the ocean. Everything was hazy. The fluorescent lights above me, the steady hum of machines, the muffled sound of footsteps in the hallway. "You're lucky to be alive," the doctor said when he came in to check on me. "Your body's weak, and stress is not your friend right now. You need absolute rest." I nodded weakly, but my thoughts were far from restful. Jessica rarely left my side. She was always there, hovering over me, adjusting my blankets, talking in soft, encouraging tones. "I'm here for you," she said one afternoon, sitting by my bed. "You scared me so much. Please, don't worry about anything. Just focus on getting better." Her words sounded kind, but I couldn't escape the unease they stirred. Every time she touched my hand or smoothed my hair, I wanted to pull away. The image of her in that lecture hall haunted me, a constant loop in my mind. "Mark, are you okay?" she asked one evening when the heart monitor began to beep faster. "I'm fine," I muttered. "Just tired." She stayed a little longer, then left, saying she needed to speak with the nurses. I didn't have the energy to respond. It was late that night when I heard voices outside my room. At first, I thought it was just the nurses chatting, but then I recognized Jessica's voice. "I told you not to come here," she said in a sharp whisper. "I had to," replied a male voice. "I couldn't just stay away." My chest tightened. It was him, the student who had visited me. "You shouldn't even be here," Jessica hissed. "If anyone sees us." "No one saw me," he cut in. "I just needed to see you." "Stop this," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "We agreed this was over." "Is that really what you want?" he asked, his tone filled with hurt. The silence that followed was deafening. I strained to hear more, but the blood rushing in my ears drowned out their voices. The heart monitor began to beep wildly, and I knew my heart was racing out of control. My breathing became shallow, and I gripped the edges of the bed, trying to steady myself. Jessica burst into the room a moment later, her face pale. "Mark, what's wrong?" I wanted to tell her that I knew everything, that I'd hurt her with him, but the words wouldn't come. The pain in my chest spread, and my vision began to blur. The last thing I heard was the sound of Jessica shouting for help as darkness overtook me. The weeks after my second heart attack were long and quiet. The doctors had been adamant. No visitors, no stress, no exceptions. Even Jessica was barred from coming, though she called the hospital every day to check on me. At first, I welcomed the isolation. Her presence had only made things worse, a constant reminder of everything I'd lost. But with nothing to distract me, my thoughts spiraled. Each sleepless night brought back the same memories. Jessica in the lecture hall, the student's voice outside my hospital room, and her lies. The trust we'd built over years had crumbled, and I was left with nothing but anger and confusion. 2 weeks later, the doctors finally allowed me to go home. Jessica was waiting for me in the car, her face lighting up the moment she saw me. "I'm so glad you're coming home," she said, her voice filled with relief. She helped me into the car, her hands gentle but trembling. At home, she went into overdrive, fussing over every detail. She brought me water, propped up my pillows, and insisted on doing everything for me. "You need to rest, Daniel," she kept saying. "Let me take care of you." Her care felt almost suffocating, like she was trying to erase what had happened by smothering me with affection. But the harder she tried, the more hollow it all felt. That night, I sat on the edge of the bed while Jessica cleaned up the kitchen. When she came into the room, I took a deep breath. "Jessica, we need to talk." Her smile faltered. "Of course. What is it?" I looked her in the eye, my voice steady. "I know about him." Her expression froze. "What are you talking about?" "I know about the student," I said. "I know what you did in the lecture hall." For a moment, she didn't move, her face pale and expressionless. Then, suddenly, she shook her head. "No, you've got it wrong," she said quickly. "I think you misunderstood." "Stop lying to me," I interrupted, my voice rising despite the effort it took. "I saw you, Jessica. I saw everything." Tears welled up in her eyes as she crumbled under the weight of my words. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "Why?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Why would you do this? Why throw everything away?" She looked away, her voice breaking as she spoke. "I don't know. I was bored. I felt stuck, like my life wasn't exciting anymore." "Exciting?" I repeated, the word burning in my throat. "You destroyed our marriage for excitement?" She wiped at her tears, her voice growing more desperate. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I wasn't thinking. I wanted to feel alive." Her words hit me like a slap. "And what about me?" I said bitterly. "Did you ever think about what this would do to me? To us?" Her sobs filled the room, but I couldn't bring myself to care. The next morning, I told her I was going back to work. "You're not ready," she said immediately, panic flashing across her face. "The doctor said you need more time." "I don't care," I replied flatly. "I'm going back, and I need to talk to him." She froze, her hands trembling. "No, Daniel. Please. You can't. It'll only make things worse." "I need answers," I said, my tone leaving no room for argument. "You're going to kill yourself," she shouted, her voice cracking. "Do you even care what that would do to me?" I met her gaze, my voice cold and steady. "You already killed me, Jessica. I'm just finishing the job." Her tears started again, but I turned away, determined to face what was left of my life on my own terms. Returning to the university was harder than I expected. The familiar halls now felt like a stage where everyone watched me. I could feel the pity in their glances, hear the whispers behind my back. "There's Daniel Miller. Poor guy. Looks like he's barely holding on." But I wasn't here for them. I wasn't here for sympathy or for questions about my health. I had one reason to be back: to confront the smug, arrogant student who thought he could take what was mine. I found him near the cafeteria, sitting on a bench with his friends. He was laughing loudly, his confidence radiating across the courtyard. I clenched my fists and walked straight up to him. "We need to talk," I said, my voice sharp and cutting through the noise. He looked up, his grin faltering for a split second before he stood. "Sure," he said with an exaggerated shrug. "Lead the way." His friends exchanged uneasy glances, whispering amongst themselves as I led him away to a quieter spot near the library. Once we were alone, I didn't hold back. "Did you enjoy it?" I asked, my words like ice. His smug grin returned. "Enjoy what?" "You know exactly what I'm talking about," I said through gritted teeth. "Was it worth it? Being with my wife?" For a moment, he looked like he might play dumb again, but then he chuckled and crossed his arms. "Oh yeah, definitely worth it." My chest tightened, but I forced myself to stay calm. "You're a disgrace." "Me?" he said, raising an eyebrow. "I'm not the one who let her get bored. Maybe if you'd been a better husband, she wouldn't have come to me." "You." He stepped closer, his smirk deepening. "Her lips are incredible, by the way. The way she moves, the way she—" "Stop," I said, my voice trembling with barely restrained fury. "You don't get to talk about her like that." "Oh, but I do," he said mockingly. "You know why? Because she came to me, Professor Miller. Not the other way around. Maybe you should think about that." For a moment, I almost lost control. My hands itched to wipe that smug look off his face, but I held back. Barely. You think this is funny? I said, my voice low and full of venom. It's not. I'm going to make sure you regret every second you spent with her. You won't just leave this university. You'll never set foot in another one. And as for Jessica, her career here is over. His grin wavered, but he quickly recovered, shrugging. You can try, he said, but you won't get far. We'll see, I said coldly, turning away before I said something, or did something, that I couldn't take back. That night, Jessica burst through the door, her face pale and her hands trembling. Daniel, we need to talk. About what? I asked, already knowing the answer. He told me what you said, she blurted out, pacing the living room. You can't do this. You can't ruin his life. Or mine. Ruin it, I said, standing slowly. You already ruined everything. I'm just cleaning up the mess you made. Tears welled up in her eyes as she tried to grab my hand. Daniel, please. I'm begging you. Let's just leave this behind us. We can start over, I promise. Just don't do this. I pulled my hand away. It's not up to you anymore, I said. You don't get to tell me how to handle this. Her sobs filled the room as I turned and walked upstairs. Alone in the dark, I stared at the ceiling, knowing that whatever came next would change everything for all of us. The house felt like a war zone, though no words were spoken. Jessica and I moved around each other like ghosts, existing in the same space but inhabiting entirely different worlds. I spent most of my time in the spare bedroom or buried in my work. She tried to reach out, but I had nothing to give her. I couldn't forget. I couldn't forgive, and she knew it. Daniel, she said one evening, standing in the doorway of the living room. I didn't respond. Please, can we talk? Her voice was quiet, pleading. I sighed and set my book aside. What is it? She stepped into the room cautiously, as if afraid to get too close. I know you're angry, and I deserve it, but we can't go on like this. Please don't take this to the university. Don't ruin everything. I stared at her for a long moment. Why shouldn't I? Because it's over, she said quickly. I swear, it's over. I'm not seeing him anymore. I'll do whatever you want. Just don't destroy me. I let out a bitter laugh. Do you think that changes anything? You humiliated me. You betrayed me. And now you want me to just let it go. Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't care. Daniel, please, she whispered. I'll end it for good. I'll fix this. Just don't take it to the dean. Don't. Stop, I said sharply. You think this is just about you? About him? This is about consequences, Jessica. You made your choice, and now you'll live with it. Her tears spilled over as I stood, towering over her. When I'm done, I said coldly, you'll never work in this field again. The letters I write will make sure of that. And him? He'll be lucky to graduate anywhere. You both threw away everything. Now you'll pay for it. She dropped to her knees, sobbing. Daniel, please. Don't do this. But I'd already walked away. That night, Jessica left the house. She didn't say where she was going, but I knew. They met in his car, parked in a dark, empty lot on the outskirts of town. He's going to ruin us, Jessica said, her voice trembling. He's serious, Nick. He's already started gathering evidence. Nick frowned, leaning back in his seat. What evidence? I don't know. Emails, messages, whatever he can find. He said he's going to write letters to the university. Blacklist me. He's going to destroy everything. Nick scoffed. He's just bitter. Let him write his little letters. What's the worst that could happen? Are you joking? Jessica snapped. The worst? I lose my job. You get expelled. My career is over. Your reputation is ruined. Is that bad enough for you? Nick looked away, biting the inside of his cheek. Okay, so what do we do? Jessica shook her head, tears streaming down her face. I don't know. He won't back down. He's not bluffing. Nick was silent for a moment, his fingers drumming against the steering wheel. Then his face lit up with a grin. Then we make him back down, he said. Jessica blinked. What? We set him up, Nick said, leaning forward. Make it look like he's the one who's out of control. Push him into doing something stupid, something that'll ruin him. If we make him the bad guy, no one will believe anything he says. Jessica stared at him, horrified. Nick, that's no. We can't. Do you have a better idea? he countered. She hesitated, biting her lip. If it doesn't work, it'll work, Nick said firmly. It has to. Jessica looked down, her hands trembling. She didn't have a better idea. I was ready to end this. Everything was prepared, emails, messages, and a formal report for the university board. I'd spent weeks collecting the evidence, and now the truth about Jessica and her lover would finally come to light. That morning, as I sat in my office, reviewing the documents, I felt a strange sense of peace. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about justice. A knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. "Come in," I said, expecting a colleague. Instead, a young woman entered as student. She was tall, blonde, and strikingly confident. She closed the door behind her, smiling in a way that immediately put me on edge. "What can I do for you?" I asked, trying to sound neutral. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she walked toward me, her movements exaggerated and unnatural. "I've been thinking about you, Professor Miller," she said, her voice low and suggestive. I frowned. "If this is about coursework, you can come back during office hours. I'm busy right now." "It's not about coursework," she replied, stepping closer. "I wanted to thank you." Before I could respond, she started unbuttoning her blouse. "Stop this right now," I snapped, standing up. She smirked, ignoring me as her blouse fell to the floor. "Oh, come on, Professor. Don't pretend you don't remember. All those afternoons in this office, the things we did, it was amazing, wasn't it?" My stomach dropped. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. "You're lying," I said, my voice shaking. "Am I?" she said, leaning against my desk. "You used to tell me how much you liked it. And those grades you gave me, so generous." It hit me all at once. This was a setup, Jessica and her lover's doing. They wanted to ruin me. "Get out," I yelled, my voice hoarse. "I know what this is. You won't get away with it." But the stress was too much. My chest tightened, and pain shot through me like fire. I gasped, clutching at my shirt as I collapsed to the floor. "Help," I whispered, but she only stared at me, frozen in panic. As my vision blurred, I saw her grab her clothes and run. Jessica and Nick were waiting for her at his apartment. She burst in, her face pale. "It worked," she said, her voice trembling. "But he had a heart attack. He's dead." Jessica froze. "Dead?" "Yes," the girl sobbed. "I didn't mean for it to go that far." Nick leaned back, smirking. "Well, that's one way to solve a problem." Jessica looked at him, horrified. "Nicky's dead. Do you understand what that means?" "It means we're safe," he said calmly. "No one will believe a word he said now. The university will pity you." This couldn't have gone better. Jessica's hands trembled, her guilt warring with relief. He was right. With Daniel gone, their reputations were untouchable. At the funeral, Jessica's tears flowed freely. She accepted the condolences of colleagues and friends, playing the part of the grieving widow flawlessly. The university board expressed their sympathy, and no one questioned her innocence. That night, she went to Nick's apartment. She told herself it was just for comfort, but the moment their lips met, comfort turned to passion. They fell into bed, their bodies entwined. Guilt and grief melted away, replaced by raw desire. When it was over, Nick brushed her hair back, a satisfied smile on his face. "See? Everything worked out." Jessica stared at the ceiling, silent. She didn't reply.